Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, this morning, whatever time it is where you are. My name is Kim Carroll. I'm an English language specialist in RELO Andes region, and I want to say welcome. And I would love to hear about you. Tell me who you are. Tell me where you are. You can use the chat box. It looks like I can see what you're writing in the chat box. So I'd love to hear, tell me where and who you are. And I will tell you a little bit about me as we get started today. So as I said, my name is Kim Carroll. My pronouns are she and her. I'm an English language specialist, and I've been working in the RELO Andes region on and off since 2019. So I hope I get to see some of my teacher colleagues here today. I currently live in South Carolina. That's the circled state, in case you don't know where it is. I live with my 2 cats and my partner. And on the left of the slide here are some teachers that I worked with when I was in Paraguay last. I'm excited to talk with you today about our topic of LGBTQIA plus students and how to connect with them. So very briefly, I would like to cover these 3 things today. First, just an awareness. So what are all these letters? What do they stand for? And what do I need to know about them? What do I need to know about students who are LGBTQ plus? More importantly is the engagement section. So how can I create a more inclusive classroom for my students? We'll talk about materials. We'll talk about the classroom culture and a little bit about self-reflection and what you can do internally and with yourself to be thinking about these topics. Finally, I have some takeaways for you, some resources, and I'll share a link with you at the end of this session today. And on that Padlet board that I made for you, there are ideas, there's some research, there's a lot of resources. A lot of them I used to help put this presentation together, and some action items, some things that you can start doing right now to think about your LGBTQ students. So hello, everyone. If you're just joining in, thank you so much for being here. Please put your name in the chat box. Tell me who you are and where you are, and we'll go ahead and get started. As we move into today's topic, I would like to ask for your agreement for today's session to please be respectful of the topic, of each other in the comments. Be accountable for your words that you type. Remember that behind every message that pops up is a human being, and we want to treat each other with respect. And finally, being open to listening and to learning something new. I know that every time I have a chance to do a session like this, I always learn a lot from the teachers and the people that come. And so I invite you to be open to listening and learning today. So first, maybe you've not attended any kind of professional development or anything on this topic before. And maybe you're thinking, why is that? Why is this even a topic? Well, there's actually some research on this and says that most teachers don't talk about this in their classrooms, or maybe haven't even thought about it, for a couple of different reasons. One is maybe you don't feel you know enough about it. Like you've never really thought about it before. It's not crossed your mind that this is something that might be affecting your classroom and learning. Second, you might think, well, that's not really my business. That's somebody's private life, and I don't need to talk about or think about that within my class. Or third, maybe you think, you know what, my classroom has a good culture already. We talk about tolerance. We talk about how to treat everyone with respect. And so I don't need to address LGBTQ issues specifically because I'm already doing it. Now, I know also sometimes we don't really know if we're supported to bring these things up in our classroom. Sometimes it can be coming from our community, our culture, politics, things going on in the world that you feel like maybe it's not okay to think about these things for our classroom. So these are some of the main reasons, and maybe you see yourself in one of those reasons about why you haven't thought about this in your classroom before. But I would like to invite you to think about why we need to talk about this. And I have a couple of reasons for you today. Hello, everybody who's just coming in. It's nice to see you. Please say hello in the chat box. I would love to see who's here. I think that it is really important that we talk about this specifically as teachers together so that we have some ideas for what to do in our classroom. And one reason, I think I'm going to share a quote with you from someone who studies this, studies school climate for LGBTQ students. And I think he says it in a really beautiful way. So let me just share this quote with you. He says, even if there is not overt anti-LGBT speech, there is still a great deal of silence. Through this silence, many LGBT students receive the message loudly and clearly that their experience is different and that it's not being spoken of because it's not normal and there's something wrong with it. There's something wrong with them. And so today we are talking about how to break some of this silence and think about the opposite of invisibility, visibility. Listening to someone's story says that that story matters and that that storyteller is important. I have a lot of statistics, but I'll just share one with you today. Another reason why I think we should think about this as teachers and as administrators of language schools. And the statistic is 86% of LGBTQ plus students were harassed or assaulted at school. We're talking about bullying here. And now it becomes all of our problems. Now it becomes an issue for everyone's comfort and safety at school. So just so you know, this statistic comes from an organization out of the US called GLSEN. It's from 2019, and it comes from a school survey, and it is about schools in the US. If anybody here has also some statistics from your country, I would love to hear them. I would love if you would share that information with me so that I can be more informed. But I would say that it's probably very similar across most of our countries. Today, I'm going to give you some general ideas about things you can be thinking about, things you can be doing in your classroom, and I want you to decide how they will work in your context. We all have different contexts. Some of us are teaching little kids, some of us are teaching university level or adult students, and we live in different cultures. So I'll give some ideas and you can think about how it would work for you. Okay? So getting to our first topic today was, what are all those letters? We said so many letters, and what do they even mean? So let's talk about that. You may have seen different kinds of letters, different strings of letters. And so you may have seen LGBT, just that. You may have seen LGBTQ or LGBTQIA or LGBTQIA2S. There's a lot of different versions of it. And it's okay. We're going to explain why that is in just a minute. So just for a quick snapshot, these are the words that go with the letters that you see on the screen here. And so all of these letters stand for these words: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual or agender, or sometimes ally. There's a lot of differences. What you need to know at the moment is this acronym, LGBTQ, is an umbrella term. So this is encompassing a lot of different kinds of people. And so before we talk about what the differences are, we need to back up and think a little bit about some assumptions that we all have about gender. And as I start talking about this, I would love for you to use the chat box and finish this sentence for me. And we're talking about assumptions, things that you've learned from your culture, from the movies, from music, from your parents and your society. What does it mean to be a man, manly, and what does it mean to be a woman? And so if you can use the chat box, I would love to see you finish the sentence, men are and women are. And let's see if we have some similarities among us in all our countries. Let me give you an example. In the past group that I did with this, people said things like, men are the providers. This is something we learn as a child. Or men are strong, or men are good at science. So those are my examples, and I would love to see what you have heard, what you have learned. Men are and women are. While you're doing that, I am going to tell you a little bit about what this might look like, how this is set up generally in our society. Marcella says men are good drivers. Oh, that's true in the US too. There's so many jokes about women being bad drivers. That's one I never thought of. I like it. And so when we think about what men are like and what women are like, remember, these are assumptions in our society. We have one way of being, that's on the left here in the man box, my man box. And so if you're manly, if you're masculine, then you are physically, biologically a male. Okay, your body, your hormones, your organs are masculine or male. That you are masculine, meaning you act like a man, you look like a man, you do things in the way a man does them. There's a lot of quotes around this because there's a lot of variation, right? And finally, that you're attracted to women. So if you're a man, you fit into this man box. And then on the other side, that there's a woman box as well. And so you are female, biologically, physically a female. That you are feminine, meaning you act like a woman, you look like a woman, you dress like a woman, you present yourself as a woman. And finally, that you are attracted to men. So generally speaking, in our Western civilization cultures, these are the two boxes that we're told we have to fit in. And so maybe you're listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, that sounds right to me. I can say I more or less fit into that box. And if you do, then that's great. Maybe you haven't had to think about this before, and that's fine. If you haven't had to think about this before, maybe you've never had to think about, will I be able to marry the person I love? Will my family support me if they know who my boyfriend or girlfriend is or my significant other is? If I tell someone who I love, will they tell everyone else? Will I get fired from my job if people find out about who I am? And so these are things that if you don't fit into those two boxes, you have to think about on a regular basis. But here's one more tricky part to this. And that tricky part is the boxes are always changing. It's always changing what it looks like to act like a man or like a woman. And in fact, here's some pictures I found for you. Oops, here we go. To show you how it changes across time and across place. It changes. These are some outfits that men wore. In the left one is in the US in the early 1940s. And on the right, this is an outfit of a French young man in the 1770s. In the middle is kind of a cowboy outfit. So these are all different views of what a man should look like and should be. And it's very different in different times and different places. Also, I want to say that there are different cultures around the world who don't believe there's only these two boxes. There are some cultures that have a third box or have a different way to describe people that might be somewhere outside of this binary form. And so just know that what we think this should be changes pretty often. So what about these boxes? I showed you these two boxes and we said, a lot of people fit into these boxes, but what about the people who don't? So let's talk a little bit about that. And that answers our question about what do all of these initials mean, LGBTQ? So let's take a look. In fact, I'm going to show you this slide instead. It's the same idea, but basically we're talking about three different things that I showed you in the boxes. One is your gender identity. So you have a little brain with the bear here. So how do you think about yourself? How do you identify? How do you see yourself? And how do you feel about yourself? And it's a continuum, right? You feel very much like a man, and there's plenty of people that fit in other places on the spectrum. And those folks might be called non-binary, people that fall in the middle of the spectrum. And there are lots of other terms that we can use to describe folks as well. Sexual orientation, they have the little heart on the bear here, is who you're attracted to. And so these would be a place where all of the words like gay, lesbian, bisexual would describe people talking about sexual orientation. Who do you love? Who are you attracted to? And then sex is the physical part. So female or male or intersex. There are folks who are born intersex. And so all of these are continuum. And then finally at the bottom is your gender expression. How do you express yourself? How do you dress? What is your body language? How do you walk into a room? And that can be very feminine, very masculine, or anywhere in the middle. And so all of these continuums are describing what it is when we're talking about folks who are LGBTQ plus, all those things. So that's a lot of information, but there's a couple things I want you to remember. First is how someone expresses their gender doesn't tell you their identity or orientation. So this is, for example, someone tells you, well, actually I'm gay, but you don't look gay. Well, because those two things are not necessarily connected. Your sexual orientation, who you love, is not connected to who you look like or how you express yourself. Okay. Second, language is always changing. That's why we have so many letters and the letters keep changing. Language is always changing and people have different attitudes about them, about the different terms. So let me give you an example. For example, the word queer, which is what the Q stands for. There are, in the US, this word was used a long time ago as a derogatory term. It was used in a way that was very ugly. And so generally, older people in the US sometimes do not like this term. They do not want to be called queer. However, folks of the younger generations have embraced it and very often identify themselves as queer. Like, oh, yeah, I'm queer. Okay. And so there's a big difference between how people want to be called. And so that's why we have so many letters to describe a lot of different situations for a lot of different people. Next, gender identity and sexual orientation are not a choice. This is not something that one day you wake up and you think, oh, I think I'll be gay or I think I'll be a lesbian today. It's not a choice. It's something that is internally part of us. And so if you hear things that are related to, oh, it's a phase, or, oh, they'll change their mind, or, well, maybe they haven't met the right person yet, it's probably, you can remind them that this is not a choice. This is who people are intrinsically. Finally, something that is coming up a lot in politics in a lot of different countries, we have to remember that gender identity and sexual orientation are not contagious. It's not something that you can catch from someone else. It's not something that you can give to someone else, and it's not something you can talk someone out of. And so these are a few things that are important to remember when we're talking about LGBTQ kids in our classes. So just thinking about some of these, especially this first one, where how someone expresses themselves doesn't really tell you who they are, what their orientation is. This shows me that we don't know if we have LGBTQ kids in our classes. We can't identify just by looking most of the time. We can't assume, oh, but not the kids in my class. The kids in my class are not this. If we have a class full of people, we can probably guess that some of the people in the class would identify as LGBTQ, and if not them, that they probably know someone, have someone they love who does, family members, community members. And so it's important to remember that. I think about that when I walk into my classes. I don't know. And so I want to make sure that I'm being respectful of folks, whether or not I can identify them in front of me. Hello, everybody who's just showed up. Thank you so much for being here. I have a question for you. And that question is, what do you do? What are you doing now? Maybe nothing yet. Maybe it's your first time thinking about this. Is there something that you're doing to create inclusive spaces for your LGBTQ students and maybe colleagues at the school level? I would love to hear in the chat box what you're doing, what you're thinking about doing. And as you're typing those things in the chat box, I'm going to give you some ideas. So we are going to today talk about materials and curriculum, how to make those more inclusive, your classroom culture and environment, and finally, self-reflection and adjustment. So there's things you could do on all different levels. And as I said earlier, take these ideas and think about how can they work for me? How can they work in my classroom? And maybe you have a colleague at your school that you can have this discussion with, and you can talk about what can we do to bring some of this into our classes. It can be very subtle or it can be big changes. Well, let's get started and take a look. So first, looking at inclusive materials and curriculum. So probably if you're using a textbook, a course book for your English class, most of them right now, they do not have a lot of LGBTQ visibility, maybe none. And I think our books right now, as a teacher, I have a new class this year, so I've been reviewing course books and looking at materials and figuring out what I want to do. And so I'm looking through a lot of books, and I notice our books today, these days, are really good at including different people from around the world of different colors, of different backgrounds. Sometimes you can see in a few books, folks with different disabilities that are represented. You can hear different Englishes, different accents in the listening activities. And so I think our books are becoming more and more inclusive, but there's still not a lot of LGBTQ visibility. So we can do this very subtly if we want, with examples and supplemental materials. And I'm looking in the chat box here, and Humberto says the only way students accept their gender is when they accept themselves, their personality and sex. That's right. And so as teachers, we want to make sure that we are there to allow that to happen, that we're not standing in the way of that happening. All right. So my first suggestion for you, is to normalize diverse families in your classroom. And so whether you're teaching beginners and you're just teaching the names of family members, or you're teaching more advanced levels where they might be reading stories with families or doing listening activities with families, you can find ways to normalize diverse families. Now, I love using The Simpsons. I love using La Familia Madrigal. They're perfect for introducing family names. But you might also want to include some families that have different kinds of relationships. So for example, there's a sitcom in the US called Modern Family. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I'm sure you have something in that you know where you are. In Modern Family, I like to talk about this family's family tree because we have a single mom raising her son. We have divorced people remarried. We have a gay son with a husband with an adopted daughter. There's a lot of different relationships that we can easily just talk about in our classrooms without making a big deal about it. These are words, this is vocabulary that our students need. And it's a way to talk about the real families that are all around us. I know you know someone or you are someone who maybe grew up with a single mom, or maybe your grandparents raised you, or maybe you have people in your family who are gay and living together as a couple. And so give our students a way to talk about their own real lives. And so normalizing diverse families is one simple way that we can do that. Second, find a way to include LGBTQ plus people, events, and history in your class. So I have an example that I used. I was putting together an activity for, it was International Women's Day in March, I believe. We don't celebrate it much here in the US. And so I was putting together an activity where they were going to read short biographies of famous women. And so I wrote up little biographies for each of these women. Maybe you know them, some of them. I wanted to make sure that the women that I chose represented different countries and cultures and backgrounds, and also to include some women that would be LGBTQ. So for example, in the second column on the left is Megan Rapinoe, and she is on the women's soccer team, World Cup team in the US. Now, we didn't do so good this year, but I will say that Megan is still one of the best soccer players in the world, and her wife is one of the best basketball players in the world. And so by just introducing the people that we would talk about anyway, and just talking about that aspect of who they are, mentioning it, talking about it, depending what you want to do, is a way that we can start including LGBTQ people. We are already talking about LGBTQ people because we've been all throughout history, but sometimes it's not really known or we don't talk about that part. Second, there are lots of events, cultural events, celebratory days that we can mention or talk about in our class when we're talking about US culture. So you may know that June is Pride Month, and in Pride Month, we are actually commemorating an event in US history. And so you could talk about that event and talk about how it started a whole movement and also worked with the environmental movement and a lot of other movements. So this would be a way that you could bring in some events and history into your classroom. For those of you just coming on, hello, and I would love to hear if you think some of these ideas would work for your classroom or what you're doing to include LGBTQ students into your class. Are we ready to move to the next section? The next thing to talk about is creating an inclusive culture and environment. Now, most of us are doing that, right? As English teachers, we really want our students to feel like they belong in the classroom. We want them to feel safe. We want them to feel heard. And we want them to feel comfortable part of their class so that they will learn and grow into good English learners, good students, and good humans. So I have a couple of points, things that you might be able to do to make sure that your classroom feels inclusive to LGBTQ students. So our first one, create a culture of respect for all people and use or create teachable moments. So I've been working with a group of teachers, and we talked about that sometimes our students say things in class, but they don't mean to be hurtful. Maybe they don't really know what the word means or how to use it in an appropriate way. They've probably heard other people say it in their lives, and they're just going to repeat it. So, for example, when I was a kid, it was very common to say something is gay, meaning it's just kind of stupid or boring. Like, how was the movie? Oh, it was so gay. I didn't like it. And that's not what gay means at all. And so your student's not trying to be hurtful, but this is a way that you could maybe have a teachable moment. Oh, why did you use that word? Well, maybe we could try a different word. And so making sure your students know that that kind of language isn't acceptable in your classroom can be really helpful to build a sense of community. If something is intentionally hurtful, like name calling, bullying, harassment, make sure you address that immediately in two ways. One, address it by making sure that the students are accountable for their words and actions. They know that it is not okay to use that kind of language in your class. And second, the other side is make sure that you're supporting the targeted student. Make sure that the student who was the receiving of the bullying knows that you're concerned about their well-being. Sometimes this is the hard part as teachers, right? We can deal in the moment with the thing that happened, but sometimes we forget to go back to that student and make sure, are you okay? Any way I can support you? And make sure that they know that you don't support that kind of behavior. Finally, I put on here, because it is the reality that we're all living in right now, prepare for difficult moments. I know sometimes we talk about this and you think, oh, that's great in somebody else's school, but I can't do this in my classroom. But we're all dealing with this in some level, right? These are not always easy topics. And we might need to think about, how will I handle it if parents want to talk about this? Or in school administration, or my district, or my community. You can talk with other folks, other teachers, about how you would handle these sorts of things. And you can be ready. Like I said, I have a lot of resources for you if you're interested. And it can help you to research, to understand, to look at those statistics and really understand why this is so important for us. Okay, my last section to talk about today is reflecting and adjusting. This actually comes first, but I wanted to leave you with it so that you're thinking about it as we finish up today. And the image I use shows people thinking maybe, but also talking. So this can happen by you working on your own thoughts, but also talking with other folks about this, people that maybe have the same ideas as you, and you're just not really sure how to implement this stuff in your particular context. So what do I mean by this, reflecting and adjusting? Have three different categories of things. One is, think about your own beliefs about LGBTQ people. This is the hard part, because we don't like to think that we have bias or we are operating under stereotypes, because we're teachers, right? We're good people. We want to do the right thing. But this word bias, I highlighted it here. A bias, if you're not familiar with the word, is a tendency or feeling or opinion, especially one that is unreasoned. So these are the things that we learn usually because we've just heard it over and over again from people, from our lives, from our stories, from our communities. And we haven't really examined, do I actually believe this? Or is it just something I think is true because everybody else thinks it's true? Having a bias does not make you a bad person. Our brains are built on biases. Our brains categorize things and try to make sense of the world. But as teachers, as humans and as teachers, it's our job to examine those biases. And so here's a little example. Let's say a student comes out to you or tells you that they are a lesbian, for example. What is your immediate reaction? Is it, oh no, I'm so sorry for the student? That's a negative bias because you had the thought of, oh, that it's bad. It's bad that she's a lesbian. Okay. Other examples of bias are, for example, gender bias. And most of the world operates with gender bias. Like when a man and a woman do the same job, but the man makes more money, it's probably due to gender bias. Or, as Marcella mentioned earlier, driving bias. Men are better drivers than women. Is it true? No, that's not based on any facts, but it's something that's passed down. So in the resources I have for you, I have a lot of questions for you to think about or talk about with a colleague to help you examine your own bias. Number 2, pay attention to the language you use. So it can be simple things like, do you use gendered language? Do you always say to your class, okay, boys and girls, okay, ladies and gentlemen? Or are there other ways you can say that? Ways that maybe aren't very talking about only men and women. Maybe you could say, everyone, everybody. Where I live, we have the word y'all, and that means you all. And so are there ways that you can address people that isn't biased by gender? Second, do you make assumptions about gender and sexual orientation? Are you looking at someone and deciding if they're gay or straight or non-binary? And third, do you respect people's names and pronouns? If people come and tell you, if you have a trans student, for example, who tells you the name I prefer is this, do you respect that name? Do you respect if a student comes out to you, tells you their sexual orientation? Do you respect their privacy? Do you know and do you ask them, does anyone else know? Thank you for telling me, and make sure that you don't tell other people unless you have permission from that person. Okay. Third piece of reflecting and adjusting is to learn more. If you're in the category of someone who says, oh, I just don't know enough about it, there's lots of places you can learn more. Learn more about the lives and the issues of LGBTQ folks. Listen to people in your own community. There are podcasts about LGBTQ history events. There are great people to follow on Instagram who talk about these things, little lessons to understand more about gender and the gender spectrum and gender identity. And so you can be a person who learns more, understands, and learn from the LGBTQ people in your community to know what steps to take and do next. Okay, so we need to wrap up today, but I would love to hear from you. One final thing, and that is, from everything we talked about today, what's one thing you're going to try to create spaces for your LGBTQ students? Is there anything you want to try? Anything new that you thought about from this webinar today? Anything you want to do differently? Any conversation you want to have maybe with your colleagues or your schools? I would love to hear that in the chat box. And in the meantime, as I mentioned, I have resources for you. And if you have a device, you can click on this QR code. And I'm also going to put in the chat box. Oh, I don't think I can actually put it in the chat box. I will do it later because I cannot put it in the chat box. I'm going to send it over. Then you can get these resources. As I said, there's a lot of great resources there. There's resources in English, also in Spanish, and workbooks and things that you can use for your own schools to talk with other teachers and other folks and give you some ideas on how to deal with this situation in your classroom. You can see in the chat, in the comments, the link is now there for the Padlet. So please feel free to take those resources. And I thank you so much for being here with us today. And I want to invite you, there's so much more to talk about. I would like to invite you to come tomorrow for the post-webinar discussion, same time, 2 o'clock Lima time. And we will continue this discussion, answer your questions, talk a little more deeply about any of these topics. And I wish you luck. I thank you for being here. And I hope you create great spaces of belonging for your LGBTQ and all of your students going forward from today. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.